do the diffusion, acceptance techniques, realign to what's important. That's where the power is. And as I say, I liken it.
Because we're talking about cortisol, and we'll get back on that. So the whole, like you mentioned before, about locking the front door.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, because we've talked about that before, but is there like other situations where that is a key factor? That was a terrible fun, locking the bloody front door.
No pun
how can
intended.
someone like manage that?
Okay, so what I used to do, I used to be out and about somewhere, and I'd always get this, I say always, but most of the time at some point, I get this kind of nagging thought of, did I lock the front door? And then my brain would start to go into, catastrophizing about somebody's going to, break in, somebody's then going to kind of, nick my computer and steal my data and, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And they're going to steal my identity and my brain would just kind of go off on this sort of major tangent and all the rest of it. But what I recognized a lot of the time was that, whilst I knew logically that it was highly unlikely that I'd unlock the door in the first place, I also knew that it was highly unlikely that I would have unlocked or left the door unlocked on a day that somebody actually tried to break into the house.
Yeah.
You conflate those two together. The likelihood was infinitesimally small that anything like that was going to happen. But my brain was like, well, I don't care. I still see this as a threat because I thought it, and therefore it's a possibility. So what I did was once I'd learned to act, was that I recognized that I had that thought, but I refused to engage in the behavior. And the behavior it wanted me to take was to leave wherever I was, go home and check. And I used the techniques, the diffusion, the acceptance, and I then just carried on with my day. And the really interesting thing was that I hardly ever get that now, but more than that, the number of times after doing that, because inevitably it did come up more often, but it rarely happens to me now.
Yeah.
But I would get home, I'd unlock the door, I'd go into the house, and then about 3/4 of an hour later, I'd suddenly remember that earlier on in the day, I'd been worried about whether I'd locked the door or not. And it just didn't even cross my mind for the rest of until 3/4 of an hour after I got on home, and suddenly it just popped into my head of, oh yeah.
And then to reinforce that then as a reaffirmation for people, is it important to recognize at that point when they've gone, oh yeah, I worried about that earlier, and then to go, well, clearly it wasn't something to worry about?
I don't think so, particularly, because again, that's just giving more credence to the original concern. It was just like, oh yeah, and carry on.
Yeah.
That's how it's almost treat it as a sort of throwaway.
Cool.
I just don't engage with it because there's no requirement to engage with it. It's not like I'm actively avoiding it, but I'll acknowledge it. Oh yeah, forgot about that, and then carry on. But when you start to engage with unhelpful thoughts, is what the research into it. You give them more power.
Yeah.
You start to give them credence where no credence actually exists, and it's that ability to recognize when you get caught up in the unhelpful thoughts, do the diffusion, acceptance techniques, realign to what's important. That's where the power is. And as I say, I liken these thoughts like a bit of a monkey on my shoulder that's banging a drum. Okay. And at certain points when I get kind of caught up in those, this monkey potentially could be banging the drum quite loudly. But as I diffuse and accept, and I do that a number of times for different kinds of thoughts, it just gets a little bit quieter, and a little bit quieter, and a little bit quieter. And whereas previously, kind of this thing sitting on my shoulder became almost like the boss of me because it was directing my actions to a large extent, because I felt anxiety, I felt I had to do what it was telling me to do. It doesn't direct my actions anymore. And that gives me so much more freedom.
Because I noticed with myself as well, is that whilst I'm reading the material and I'm working with you, I've noticed my mind is quieter. Normally where I'd be like doing shoots like this, I would think about more scenarios. But I notice now that I'm not spending the same amount of time, where that might go into the night and while I'm sleeping, that doesn't happen anymore.
What do you think that is for you?
Do you know, I think it's just sometimes when you read something or you talk about something and it becomes a forefront of your mind, whilst you're not actively engaged in, like, I'm not actively engaged in doing the act techniques myself, I'm very aware of its presence and its benefit.
So you have been paying attention on
I
occasions.
have been paying attention, and it has helped with my own
Oh, there you go. That's nice to hear.
my own stress, in the sense of that it's helped quieten me in the situations. You know, there is still situations where I still get stressed, but that's natural. But I've noticed the things that I would normally worry about, they're quieter and they don't last as long.